Okay, let's do part two, World War II unfolds. There's a question set for this one, as there are for all of these. So follow along with that, answer the questions as we go. The activity I want you to focus on once you get through this, the history activity, is the Lend-Lease Act. And it's not as complicated or as long as it looks. It's basically asking you to look at pictures. They're on the packet pages, or you can look at them online as well if you need a better view. And then answer the questions about the Lend-Lease Act. We'll talk about that as we go through this. So how does World War II unfold? That's the subject of our topic this evening on the video. World War II is considered to be a single event, but it was really made up of several wars that eventually get all linked together. What is commonly taught, unlike what is commonly taught, it has no single start date. It develops in phases. Let's look at the phases that it develops in. The first one happened. This is not generally considered to be the first part of World War II, but I consider it to be the first opening round of World War II because like I said, it gets rolled up into it. In 1937, Japan invaded China, not for the first time in that decade, the second time in that decade alone. This was called by the Japanese the Second Sino-Japanese War, or by the Chinese the War of Resistance. It lasts all the way to the end of fighting in World War II in 1945. And eventually, like I said, other allies of China, like the United States, are going to get involved in this fighting too. It becomes part of World War II. Now, World War II itself is properly thought of as starting on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland. The United Kingdom and France declared war on Germany. When they did that, that's usually the date given for the beginning of World War II. Now, but that's a matter of opinion. We tend to be very Eurocentric in our outlook. The war between Japan and China was probably the second largest part of the fighting in World War II, according to the deaths and all that happened in them. We'll take a look at that in a second. The following year, June the 10th, 1940, Italy got involved in the war by declaring it on the United Kingdom and France. They attacked United Kingdom's colony in Egypt, in North Africa. A year later, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, and opened up what was called the Eastern Front of the war. That was the largest front by far as the number of people, the number of deaths. These huge battles between Germany and the Soviet Union that were referenced in that video in part one, where so many people died. That's the Eastern Front, where the bulk of fighting actually takes place. From the American point of view, December 7th, 1941, when Japan attacks Pearl Harbor, that is the beginning of World War II for the United States. Really, the final piece of the puzzle happens 4 days later when Germany and Italy declare war on the U.S. They didn't have to do that. Japan was an ally, so Hitler and Mussolini, always aggressive, decided to just declare war on the United States. Hitler was still angry from the United States helping England and so forth, so he had no problem with doing that. And that solved the problem for President Roosevelt, who wanted the U.S. to be in the war in Europe so he could go after the Nazis and the fascists in Italy and get to them that way. He would have had a harder time doing that had Germany and Italy not declared war. That was the first mistake Hitler made in this war. It won't be the last. Let's take a look at, through the use of newspapers of the day and some short video clips, how all this played out. Now, in 1937, again, Japan invaded China, and the Japanese government at that time was very brutal, and it treated its soldiers with a lot of what you might just say was sheer torture. It did that to its own soldiers, and its soldiers, in turn, went after civilians that they were fighting and did just horrendous, brutal things to them, especially in China. Japan was an island nation, is an island nation. They were looking for resources, and they wanted land in Asia, and that included significant parts of China. They invaded China. They committed what's now called the Nanjing Massacre. It's called the Rape of Nanjing. Hundreds of thousands of Chinese are killed. Tens of thousands of Chinese women are raped by Japanese soldiers. Again, the brutality of all this is just off the scale. It's hard to see how human beings can do these sorts of things to other human beings. I won't get into great details here. I am going to show a few short video clips, including this one. You're going to hear an older Chinese man describe what happened to his mother and his baby brother when he was a child at the hands. He refers to them as devils. And that shows you there's still, even now, there's still a bit of tension between China and Japan over what happened in World War II. It's something that they try not to talk about too much because there's still a lot of anger, especially among the Chinese toward the Japanese about this. So let's listen to a little bit of this.
人民成年来了，从这几个人民，前面那个我就看了3个，看了大刀是端着枪进来了，他一看到了我已经砰开枪，一将前面人打倒下来了，这打倒下来就慌了，啊，救起来了。我母亲抱着我的挺小的弟弟，小弟弟拼命的哭，妈妈就给他起来，叫他不要哭。就在这个时候，那个日本鬼子扎了刺刀，一刺刀戳到我母亲就把我母亲倒下来了，倒下来小孩掉了要快掉的地下来了，母亲还趁着进去的，弟弟抱他没给他掉下去。鬼子把这个刺刀拔出去以后，又一刺刀戳到我母亲刀脚还倒下来，把我弟弟摔在地下了，我弟弟丢在地下。弟弟我们就哭喊哦，不要戳我妈妈，不要戳我妈妈。这个时候呢，我那个顶小的弟弟不是给鬼子戳的掉地下了吗？有个鬼子小弟弟在底下哭呢，那个鬼子把我那2个弟弟戳倒了以后，看那小孩在哭，在我弟弟屁股高头一刺刀一跳，我走了进来，看到我妈妈碎了脸，碎个头，呛到那个柱子片，看碎了看。碎了看，我一看到我妈妈碎了看，我妈妈没死，看到我看到我妈妈，2个眼睛对我看我的妈妈你怎么样？我的妈妈也看到我眼里去掉，妈不能讲话，看到嘴里动动讲不出来。我那边有小孩哭的声音，好像是我弟弟。我明白妈妈意思了，我说妈妈我可以看一下啊，是不是小爸爸我那个顶下的弟子？叫爸爸，我就走了去找到地下全是死人，地下全是血，那个地下碗的血，踩的就在那发黏了，那个天特别冷，我绕前头一堆死人，几个堆着个中间一个窿大，一个小孩趴在那块，像他草上爬，那是我弟弟，哇哭，喊妈妈哭，我弟弟。
Again, some of this can get emotional. Happened decades ago when this older man was telling it, and you can still see how it scarred him for life. Again, the brutality here is pretty enormous, and that includes there's brutality on all sides of this. The Chinese, the government, there were 2 different Chinese forces fighting against the Japanese. One was the government army, and then there was a communist army that was fighting against them too. They both used techniques to stop the Japanese. The one that stopped, that did the most damage was when they deliberately flooded a significant portion of China just to stop the Japanese army. That killed 500,000 Chinese in doing that. So again, you see these things, and we'll show. There's a little bit of a video clip. I'll just show a few seconds of that. I showed these because this particular kind of video clip or movie clip was how most people got their news at this time. They went to the theater to get it, and they would watch these little video clips.
Of the work not of armies, but of nature.
The
Yellow River is in flood, driving hundreds of thousands from their homes and delaying the Japanese advance. Both Chinese and Japanese are accused of causing the breach, but the Yellow River has a way of breaking its own banks. Here is an actual gap.
So yeah, the Yellow River is one of the most dangerous and deadly rivers in the world. It doesn't need a lot of help to flood, and so when the Chinese did this part, deliberately flooded it. They ended up stopping the Japanese, yes, but at the cost of about 500,000 people in doing that. So the willingness of people to do these sorts of things in World War II is It's mind-boggling. That's why there's so many deaths in it. So while that's going on in Asia, we go back to Europe now. Germany invades Poland. That's the start of the war in Europe. Poland was invaded on September 1st, 1939, and it was actually invaded in two different directions. The Germans did it. That's the one we remember because it started the war. But also the Soviet Union invaded Poland. It worked out a deal with Germany to split Poland between the two. So Poland's getting invaded from both sides. The UK and France declare war on Germany because they had told Germany not to do it, or they would declare war on them. They did it anyway. The Germans use this new fighting technique that they call blitzkrieg, where they use the new airplane fighting, as well as these new tanks of theirs that go very fast. And they basically just overwhelm a country with this mechanized warfare and how fast it can move. Most countries were not prepared for that. Most countries were thinking that World War II, if it came, was going to be like World War I with all the trench fighting and so forth. But this was a different war. Things had changed in the 20 years between the two wars. So the French had actually started to invade Germany when this happened, and they stopped and turned around and went sort of fortified their borders, waiting for the Germans to attack them. So Poland had been an independent nation, but now it was split between Germany and the Soviet Union, and basically Poland ceases to exist as a nation for the rest of World War II. So that's going on there in Europe, and then Germany, not satisfied, or Hitler, not satisfied, begins to invade his neighbors, first to the north. He launches an invasion of Denmark and Norway. Denmark will fall in the matter of about literally a couple of hours. Norway takes longer, a few months, before Germany is able to subdue it. But again, the blitzkrieg attack is very effective. The Navy has bombarded the coast of Norway until they finally surrendered. And so Germany, in a matter of months, has taken out the countries to its north that could be a problem to it. Again, Denmark surrendered in 9 hours. Then Germany turns their attention to the west, and countries like Belgium and particularly France. That was Germany's main opponent. Had been in World War I, thought it was going to be in World War II. So the Germans invade France on May the 10th of 1940. They attacked, just like as they had in World War I, they attacked through Belgium again. The British and French at that point were waiting for them, but they were not used to this new warfare. The Germans break through rapidly, push the British back to the coast of Dunkirk. If you've seen the recent movie by Christopher Nolan, I recommend it. It's a pretty good historical recreation of the events around Dunkirk, which was a very significant thing for the British, especially. It's one of those moments in British history that it was a defeat, but it turned into a kind of victory for them. They were able to get their army off of the continent and escape the Germans. While this is going on, Norway surrenders. Italy declares war on the UK and France. Things are looking very bad for the allies of the United States. Germany and now Italy are seeming to be invincible. The Germans outflank the French Maginot Line, which was supposed to be the way that France wanted to defend itself. It did not work.
Weapons.
Scan
Any enemy.
There's
But
a map
Germany
in here.
remained in iron body error. Wasn't long-sightedness through the Ardennes forest. French.
Okay, so the border between France and Germany was fortified with these huge guns, and that was called the Maginot Line. All the guns were pointing at Germany. Well, Germany just goes around to Belgium, attacks, threatens Paris, eventually conquers it, and then comes around the back of the Maginot Line and just blows it up. So that whole idea of fighting World War I all over again, that's what causes France to lose to Germany. This was not World War I. Germans were not going to get involved in trench warfare this time. And so France falls to Germany in a matter of just a few weeks. And that was a shock to most of the world that it fell that quickly. The Germans are in Paris by June the 14th. Hitler's taking pictures with the Eiffel Tower in the background. And now France and the northern European countries are knocked out of the war. England's hanging on, trying to fight the Germans by itself. And for the rest of 1940, we get what's called the Battle of Britain. This is a air warfare mostly between the UK and Germany. The Germans will invade or try to bomb the English into submission night after night, sending airplanes over London, dropping bombs on it, hoping the British will surrender. But the British have a couple of things going for them that we'll talk about in a second. Meanwhile, this is happening. All this is getting radioed back to the United States. Americans are listening to this night after night, and it's slowly changing public opinion in America that instead of being neutral, we need to do something to help Great Britain. Germany is not going to stop. They're going to keep invading everyone. We have to get involved. And so night after night, Americans would listen to
August 24th, 1940.
This is Trafalgar Square. The noise that you hear at the moment is the sound of the air raid sirens. I'm standing here just on the steps of St. Martin's in the Fields. A searchlight just burst into action off in the distance. One single beam sweeping the sky above me now. People are walking along quite quietly. We're just at the entrance of an air raid shelter here, and I must move this cable over just a bit so people can walk in. I can see just straight away in front of me Lord Nelson on top of that big column. There's another searchlight just square behind Nelson's statue.
So those wailing sirens are being piped in by radio into American homes night after night. And most Americans are starting to realize that we're not going to be able to escape this war. We're going to have to come to Britain's defense, which is something that President Roosevelt wants to do. But Britain is able to hang on for a while on their own through some use of new technology. They have a great Air Force, and they're assisted by this new thing called radar, which Britain invented, that helped them to detect the German planes coming and allow them to get British planes up in the air to meet them. And they also had the first, I guess what you could call a computer. They're not really computers. If you saw a movie called The Imitation Game, Benedict Cumberbatch plays in it. It's about the creation of that thing, the thing that you see there, which is sort of kind of like the first computer ever made to help decipher the German code. And that allowed Britain to detect when things were about to happen and get their defenses in place for this. So Britain is able to fight off Germany for the rest of 1940 in the hopes that the U.S. will eventually join the war effort. Now, back home in the U.S., President Roosevelt is wanting to do just that. He finally gives up on pretending to be neutral on this, asks Congress to pass the Lend-Lease Act, and because public opinion is changing in the United States, that Congress approves it. And this gives Roosevelt the power to either lend stuff to, basically give stuff to Britain and also Russia, the two countries that are still fighting off Germany at this point, to assist them and to keeping Germany from conquering everyone. And you're going to do an activity about that when we get through with this. So by the time we get through with 1940, it's only a matter of time before the U.S. is going to enter this war. It's only a question of how it's going to enter this war. The Lend-Lease Act, our economy's picking up because now we're building all this war material to help both England and Russia, or UK and USSR. And then we get to the point where before we get to the U.S. actually entering the war, another front breaks out in North Africa between Italy and the United Kingdom. Italy was looking to get in on the action to recreate the Roman Empire. That's how Mussolini and the Italian leaders saw that. They wanted to be the new Roman Empire in the world. And I don't know why that clicked on that. So they launched an invasion into Egypt, which is the English colony at the time, hoping to take over the colony there, and also the Suez Canal, which is in Egypt. England, however, was able to very effectively, almost pretty easily, push the Italians back. The Italians, it turned out, they thought they had this new fancy Air Force and Navy. Their army wasn't that good, and England was able to push them back to the point where Germany had to rush into North Africa and start to help the Italians. So now this new front of the war is actually taking German soldiers out of Europe to help the Italians fight off the British. The British have a general named Bernard Montgomery. There's the guy on the left. He and the German general, who both of these guys become very famous. They almost become like movie celebrities. Even the German general Erwin Rommel had a very stylish personality about him. He was not your typical Nazi, I guess you could say. Very brilliant general. So was Montgomery. And so even though these guys are becoming media stars, not just generals, in places like the United States, as people watch them fight back and forth across North Africa, a fight that we will soon be a part of ourselves. Now, I mentioned before that we were going to loan stuff to Russia. Initially, the Germans and Soviet Union had been allies. They divided up Poland between themselves. But Germany was going to attack. And so Hitler stabs Stalin, the leader of the Soviet Union, in the back and invades the Soviet Union. This will be Hitler's second big mistake. It doesn't look like one at first because Germany's very successful in the early part. They push deep into Soviet Union. They have three different armies going after the Soviet Union. But the Soviet Union is a huge country. And it just takes time to try and conquer such a country. And it's lots of people, and it's going to get very cold eventually, and that's going to be a thing that hurts the Germans as well. They invade in June when it's summer. They open up a new Eastern Front there. Again, this will be where the biggest battles of the war are fought. For most of 41, Germany keeps the advantage. They keep pushing deeper and deeper into the Soviet Union. Eventually, however, the Soviets begin to muster up a resistance. They slow them down, and then when the Russian winter comes, it begins to take its toll on the German army, because the German army wasn't ready for this. They were supposed to be done with this war by the time we got to winter. But they're not, and now they're having to fight. And Russian winters are very, very cold. The Russian army was prepared for this. They're used to fighting in this sort of weather. The German army was not. A lot of them didn't have cold weather gear, that sort of thing. So as the winter comes in, the battle begins to turn. The Russians stop the Germans and begin to push them back even a little bit. So that's something that now Hitler has gotten himself into, that he's going to have a devil of a time trying to get out of again. And then the final part of this is when Japan attacks the United States in Hawaii, destroys their Pacific Fleet, and that brings the U.S. into war. The U.S. and Japan had been in a lot of disputes with each other throughout the 1930s, trade disputes, that sort of thing. The U.S. very much did not like Japan invading China, the slaughtering of people that was going on there. So there was this ongoing hostility, not fighting yet, but the fighting didn't actually start between the two until Pearl Harbor. So now, once Pearl Harbor has happened, and back then Hawaii was not a state, so Hawaii is just a territory, and it's way out there in the Pacific Ocean. So, whoops, I got the wrong link there. I clicked on that, sorry. So when Japan does the surprise attack on the U.S. naval base in Hawaii, it is without question something that the U.S. is going to become involved with as far as warfare goes. And then Germany and Italy again declare war on the United States after that. So where that leaves us is now at the end of 1941, you have the Allies and the Axis powers, just like the game. You have major powers on the Axis side, being Germany. They're at war with the UK, the USSR, and now the US in Europe. and in North Africa. Italy is in war with the UK and North Africa and providing support to Germany and Eastern Europe. And Japan is now fighting in China and now against the United States. The Allied powers, on the other hand, are the United Kingdom fighting in North Africa and at home against Germany and Italy. China is trying to fight out the Japanese. The Soviet Union now is an Allied power trying to fight out the Germans and the Italians in their own country. And the United States is sort of the final piece of this puzzle on the Allied side when Japan attacks it. So the United States is going to have to fight a war on two different fronts. And we're talking about a global war here. There's two different theaters halfway around the world from each other. You have the what's called the European or the European and African theater here in that part of the world. We're going to have to send soldiers over here. Here's the United States, so the Atlantic Ocean, we're going to have to go east to get back over to this part. And then we're going to also have to send people across the Pacific Ocean into these parts here where we're going to have to fight Japan in a war there. That's a hard task to do. So you're going to do an activity, not today after this, but later, that shows just how much the Earth we're talking about, we're going to have to move people across. So those are the two theaters. The theater in this context is a place where warfare is occurring. It's not a place where you go watch a movie. The Pacific theater is where the U.S. and Japan mostly are fighting each other. And the European and African theater are where everybody else is fighting each other somewhere. So that's where it's going to happen. And that pretty much ends this section. We'll go into part 3 in the next video. Thanks for listening.